Hi, welcome back to the channel. In today's episode, I want to talk about a story that on the face of it looks like it's about fuel shortages in Russia, but I actually think the problem is now starting to become much bigger than that for the Russian economy. Over the past few weeks, we've discussed refinery attacks from all of the drones from Ukraine, gasoline shortages, queues at filling stations, restrictions on fuel sales, maximum of 20 litres in a lot of filling stations, and reports that Russia is now importing gasoline and it's lowered the quality of all of its fuel. Now, individually, they are all interesting stories, and I'm sure you've enjoyed those videos. But in today's video, I want to take a step back and look at the bigger picture, because what we are seeing is something very worrying for the Kremlin. Russia is beginning to move backwards economically. And that's why this video is called Russia Regresses, because instead of moving further up the industrial ladder and creating more value from its natural resources, Russia is increasingly being forced back into the role of simply exporting raw materials, while other countries make the real profits. And if that trend continues, it will have a profound influence and consequence for the Russian economy over the next few years. Now, before we get into the details of all of this, if you're enjoying my videos, could I ask you to subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already? It really does help me with the algorithm, also puts a smile on my face. And if you could give me a thumbs up for this video, it means that YouTube will promote it more to more people. And if you've got the option of hyping the video, then please do that, because that will accelerate that process and mean that everybody gets a chance to watch this video. It's a wider audience and it really will help the channel. So thank you very much if you're helping out in one of those ways. Now, one of the first things that you're taught in economics is that countries become wealthier by moving up what's known as the value chain. Imagine you've got a barrel of crude oil. You can simply sell that barrel for whatever price you can get, or you can refine it into gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, and lots of other petroleum products. Then those products become plastics, chemicals, fertilizers, pharmaceuticals, synthetic fibers, and thousands of everyday items that all generate additional value. Every stage creates more jobs, more investment, more technology, higher wages, higher tax revenues, and ultimately a richer economy. That's exactly what developed economies have spent decades trying to achieve. They don't simply export raw materials, they process them, they manufacture them, they innovate, they create high-value industries. And what's fascinating about Russia today is that we're seeing movement in exactly the opposite direction. Over the past 12 months, Ukraine has repeatedly targeted Russian oil refineries using long-range drone attacks. If you've been following the channel, you'll know that we've talked a lot about this. Ukraine is achieving hits over 1,000 miles from its border in some instances, and the attacks are widespread and have stretched from the Baltic all the way back down towards the Black Sea and deep into southern Russia. Every refinery that's damaged reduces Russia's ability to process crude oil into finished products, those higher value products. That immediately creates two problems. The first is domestic. Less refining means less gasoline and diesel available for Russian consumers and businesses. The second problem is international. Instead of exporting higher value refined products like gasoline and diesel and jet fuel, Russia increasingly finds itself exporting crude oil instead. And that's exactly what's going on right now, because Russia is still pumping 9 million barrels of oil out of the ground every day. And if it can't process that oil, it doesn't have anywhere to store it. It needs to keep all the drilling rigs pumping as much as they can because it doesn't want to create future problems. So if you can't divert that oil into your own refinery network, the only other option is to export it. And that's what Russia is doing. So the latest reports show that crude oil exports from Russia's western ports have climbed to their highest levels on record. Now, at first glance, you might think that that's good news. Record exports. It's more exports, more oil being shipped, more foreign currency coming into the country. Happy days for Russia, you would think. But when you look beneath the headline, it tells a very different story. Russia isn't exporting refined products basically because it hasn't got enough to export. Its refineries simply don't have the capacity they once had because a lot of them are damaged. So instead, Russia is selling the raw material, crude oil, and allowing someone else to earn the profits from refining that crude into all of those beautiful finished products. And what we've learned this week is that the gasoline being produced at India's Nayara refinery has been sold back into Russia. Now, if you just think about that for the moment, Russia is one of the world's largest oil producers. However, it's now importing gasoline because its domestic refining capacity has been so severely disrupted that it doesn't produce enough even to feed its own demand. Economically, that is a remarkable reversal. Rather than selling premium products to the world, Russia is increasingly selling crude and buying back the finished fuel. You will make a loss on that. That's exactly the opposite of the direction all economies aspire to travel in. There's another consequence here. The refining industry doesn't just generate profits, it supports skilled engineering jobs, maintenance contractors, technology companies, transport businesses, ports, chemical manufacturers, research and development, training, investment. An entire industrial ecosystem grows around the refining industry. Russia has 44 mega refineries. So when refining activity falls, all of the associated industries come under pressure too because they've got nothing to do. Reports coming out from southern Russia say that fuel shortages themselves are now becoming increasingly disruptive. We've seen the videos of queues at filling stations up to 3 or 4 hours long. There are restrictions on fuel sales now. You can't buy more than 20 litres in a lot of the gasoline stations. And authorities have reduced the quality of fuel specifications. So they're happy for lower quality fuel to now be sold in Russia, basically because they are desperate. In some areas, volunteers and Cossack groups, so the guys with the big black hats that you've seen historically in movies, are now helping to maintain order at gasoline stations as frustration grows amongst motorists trying to obtain fuels. You may have seen on social media fights breaking out in those queues, people getting very upset if somebody's seen to be cutting into the queue, and there's actually been some violence. Now, that isn't something you'd normally associate with one of the world's largest energy exporters. In fact, it's quite an extraordinary situation, and the irony is difficult to ignore. Russia possesses enormous oil reserves, yet consumers in parts of the country are struggling to buy gasoline to fill up their vehicles. At the same time, something else interesting is happening. Demand for electric vehicles is now increasing rapidly. Why? Well, because some consumers, electricity is becoming more predictable than gasoline. Now, I'm not suggesting that electric vehicles are going to take over Russia overnight. It's going to take a bit of time. But when fuel shortages begin changing consumer behaviour, it tells you that the disruption is becoming significant enough for people to start looking to alternatives. Now, there's another development worth discussing here. European governments continue tightening sanctions against Russia's so-called shadow fleet, the aging tankers being used to move Russian oil around the world outside traditional shipping networks. Latest reports show that authorities are now investigating vessels falsely operating under foreign flags in an effort to make sanctions much more difficult for Russia. These additional enforcements will mean that Russia is now facing additional logistical challenges to exporting its oil. So where does all this leave the Russian economy? Well, today's story is much more than about fuel. It's about industrial capability. For decades, countries around the world have tried to move up the value chain and to become more wealthy. Russia at the moment is moving down the value chain. It's exporting crude oil, which is the very basic product. It's producing less refined fuel, which is where all the value is added. It's importing gasoline, which is very expensive. And it's losing industrial capacity because it's not refining the oil, allowing other countries to capture more of the value created from Russian natural resources, which is unbelievable. You wouldn't have thought that Russia would have allowed this to happen. This isn't a temporary inconvenience either. And if it continues, it risks reducing productivity, weakening industrial competitiveness, and increasing dependence on commodity exports rather than higher value manufacturing. And history tells us that economies which rely primarily on exporting raw materials often struggle to achieve the same long-term growth as economies that process, manufacture, and innovate. Now, none of this means that Russia's oil industry is going to close down tomorrow. Russia remains one of the largest energy producers on the planet. But the details that we've talked about today show that the structure of its industry is now changing, and that isn't going in Russia's favour. When you put all of this data together with the recent services PMI information that showed that the services industry is now contracting, the high interest rates in Russia, the weaker business confidence that's around at the moment, the slowing investment and growing pressure across multiple sectors, you begin to see a consistent pattern emerging. It's no longer one of isolated problems, it's a series of interconnected pressures affecting different parts of the economy simultaneously. And that's why this story matters. Not because Russia exported more crude oil this month, which you could mistake as being a positive thing for the economy, but because that tells us about the direction of travel for the Russian economy, and it is going backwards. So hopefully you've enjoyed today's video, you found it useful, informative, and most importantly thought-provoking. If you did like what I've said, then please give me a thumbs up. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and maybe hit that hype button if you have the opportunity to do so for today's video. I'd like to say thank you to everyone that's supported me. If you've bought me a coffee or sent me YouTube super thanks or signed up as a patron or a member, thank you so much for that support. It really does help to keep me motivated. I can't stress that enough. Without it, I'm not sure I would have continued at certain points, but I sort of feel that I've got an obligation because you're supporting me, so I want to keep giving you quality content. So thank you so much. If you're one of the people who is supporting me, I really do appreciate it. Just wanted to mention my new channel, Build and Design, now live. You can see lots of really exciting and interesting things about everything to do with real estate. We're at the start of our journey. We could do with some help. So if you could watch some of the videos and subscribe, that would be brilliant. Thank you so much for that.